we'll spend the next 40 minutes or so talking. I just want to let you know that anytime you have a question, interrupt me, raise your hand if you don't understand something, because we'll talk as if I think everyone knows what I'm talking about, and they might not. Raise your hand if you have a question about something that I haven't talked about with one of the pieces. Raise your hand. It's super informal, so that's the atmosphere I'd like.
Raise your hand just for the sake of raising.
Right, just raise your hand, shout out or something. So I think I will tell you just a tiny bit about my background and talk about the work and how I started making the work. I actually studied ceramics. I have a bachelor's and a master's in ceramics, and I was doing it regularly and showing until I started having children. And then it slowed down a bit. I was living in New York City, and I lived uptown. My studio space was downtown. It was very hard to get there. I had little ones. It wasn't really working so well for me. At the same time, because I was home more, I taught myself how to quilt. And I learned sewing in home ec. I learned how to sew also. My mom taught me. I was sewing on a sewing machine in my teens. And my mom constantly quilted. So it was in the era around me. I had never done it, but I decided I was going to learn how to quilt because that I could do at home very easily with my babies asleep, and I could sit and quilt. And I remember my first child, she would just lie on my lap, and I was making a tiny little quilt, and it would sort of be draped on her, and I was quilting over her. So at this time, I started spending less time in the ceramic studio and more time with the quilting. And I transferred the concepts that I was working on in clay into fabric. I've always been interested in Judaism. I've always been interested in Jewish ritual and in feminism. And so those three things came together in my ceramic life and then came together in my fabric life. So after I had my first child, my daughter, I started thinking, when you become a parent, or at least for me, when I became a parent, everything that I did in my life, I started thinking about differently because it was going to affect this child I just brought into the world. And so one of the things that I was thinking about was how I was going to raise her as a Jewish girl and a Jewish woman. And I grew up in an egalitarian home, Jewishly. I learned the same as the boys in my synagogue. I participated in the services in the same way, but I did not wear a prayer shawl, a tallis. It just wasn't customary in my synagogue. But I decided that I wanted my daughter to wear one, and if she was going to wear one, then I needed to model the behavior, and I needed to wear one. So that's kind of how it works once you're a parent, I guess. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to start wearing one. It's not that easy for someone who hasn't grown up doing something like that. So I started looking around for a tallis that I would want to wear. And I have very warm, positive ideas about wearing a tallis. The one my father wore, my mom also weaves, so she actually wove for him. I would see my grandfathers wear them. But when I started looking for one, I did not find one that I wanted to wear. They seemed, the vocabulary of the traditional tallis with the stripes and the black and white or the blue and white seemed very male to me. And I wanted something that was more, I guess, just personal and more for me. Yes?
Are tallis usually something that you purchase, or is it commonplace for people to make them for themselves? Or to make them for others as gifts?
95% purchase.
Okay.
I mean, I think since probably the 70s and the beginning of the do-it-yourself Judaism, maybe people started making them. But almost exclusively people buy them.
What is the we find right now? What is that?
Good. So the reason people wear them is that it's written in the Torah, in the Bible, that you have to put tzitzit, which are these strings, on the corners of your garments. So that's what it says in the Torah, and then the rabbis have expanded on that to say that during certain prayer services, men need to wear these prayer shawls. A lot of traditional men, and actually some women today, very few, but some, also wear the tzitzit, the strings attached to almost an undershirt under their clothes, and they wear them all the time. And then during a prayer service, they will put the prayer shawl on over that. So as I was trying to decide what kind of tallis I wanted to wear, I was also in services as a young mother with young kids underfoot, having a really hard time figuring out how to be in services with my kids running around, trying to get some sort of like prayer experience, and having this prayer shawl falling off me, and it wasn't working. I kept thinking to myself, who designed this? It's designed so poorly. So at the same time, I studied Jewish text regularly for about 12 years with a group of artists. And so we were studying about the priests, the high priests during the time of the temple, the big temple in Jerusalem. And they had very specific clothing that they had to wear, and it was very functional. It was robes, tunics, and they had the tzitzit on them, and they were beautiful, but they were functional. So I had that in my mind. I also had the idea of an apron, an iconic woman's functional piece of clothing. And I had started collecting vintage apron patterns, and they were all extremely functional, but they were all very, very decorative, and they were all different. And so I don't know how these things happen, but these two ideas collided, and out came a ritual garment that was based on a vintage apron pattern that also gave mention to the idea of the priest's robe and sort of brought it all together.
I don't know if you're going to mention after or not, but the tzitzit, so they have a symbol or why they...
So first of all, the tzitzit are made out of special string. It's wool, and it's my understanding that the string for the tzitzit has to be spun specifically for tzitzit. When you tie them, there's a certain way to tie them, a knot, and you wrap it in a knot, and there's certain numbers. Although different communities have different numbers of how they do it, but it's tradition. And then it's my understanding that the mitzvah of wearing these, the reason that it's written in the Torah is so that it's a physical reminder of God and of the mitzvot and of the things that we're supposed to do every day as Jews. Yeah. So I started making these, and I will talk just about, is there one specific you want me to talk about, you want me to start with?
I have it right there.
This one right here.
You're on my Facebook page, so I
Okay, so this one, all my work is highly personal in the reason that I make it, and all of them tell a different story. So I have two daughters. I think a lot about them growing up, how I'm going to raise them, all that kind of stuff. And this piece here, my daughter's just 12. I was thinking about this 5 years ago when I was making it, but I was reading some new rituals that women have created, new Jewish rituals that women have created. And there's a ritual that women have created for the first time a girl menstruates. And I thought, wow, that just struck me. It's so interesting, so neat. I remember, I just hadn't heard of that before. And so there was a prayer written for a monthly prayer that was written by a modern Jewish thinker for women to say, basically thanking God for making their body work the way it should every month. So I thought, wouldn't that be so interesting to do something so positive about getting your period for the first time? I had my daughter in mind, and then every month you could wear this top. So you picked a real, you picked a good one. This one here is the American ones are two of my newest ones, and I'll show you. On this one, it doesn't have it, but a lot of my work has things on the inside that you can't see because you're not allowed to touch it, but I can see, so I will show you, and I can touch it. So the inside of this piece has vintage tea towels on the inside. And there's a different one. And this one actually, I found it has a K. My last name's Kanter. I thought that was great. And both these pieces are all vintage fabric that I collected. This quilt block here I made, but these quilt blocks are all, I found that way. And I bought them at an antique shop. These pieces are about the idea of belonging. I grew up outside of Syracuse, New York, and there's a nice Jewish community, but it's not a sizable Jewish community. And I was third generation growing up there. My grandmother moved there when she was 2 or 3 and grew up there. My mom grew up there. I grew up there. So I was in this town for a very long time, yet didn't feel like I really belonged. And growing up, I really felt like the children of immigrants, even though it was already generations old. So it was just the 100th anniversary of when my grandmother moved to Syracuse, and my sister and brother live there now and have kids there. So they're the 4th generation. And so I wanted to make tallatot that spoke of being American, being Jewish, feeling okay with embracing this Americana, patriotic life. So that's where these came from, those two. And both of these, I should have brought my notes, but I believe, well, certainly this one I think was an apron pattern, I think from the 1940s. And this one, well, afterwards, if you look around, there's a button on the back, a vintage button. So I tried to make it all really thoughtful, all the pieces really well. I'll tell you about this one, and there's another one in that back corner that are very similar. So I grew up in central New York. There's tons of farms there. You drive, 5 miles in any direction and you're going to hit farmland. And I ran into a girl, I went to high school with a Jewish girl who ended up being a chicken farmer. And I thought that was so fascinating. I didn't know any Jewish farmers, although I knew generations ago when my grandparents moved there were a lot of farmers. There was actually someone my grandmother knew who auctioned cattle in the area. But certainly in my generation, I didn't know anything about Jewish women farmers, so I thought I would find them. And I started asking around, and I did find them. And I started making work about them. So this is it's not the chicken farmer, but it's someone who was doing organic dairy cows and also breeding horses. And she rides horses, her husband was doing dairy cows. And so this is a picture of her farm. And on all my farm work, because I have this ritual tablecloth also, on all my farm work, I always, on the inside, I collect vintage feed sacks from New York State.